Moscow has been playing a large role in the dialogue of war in the Gulf. That continued today as Moscow called for a ceasefire after a speech by Saddam Hussein indicating he would withdraw unconditionally from Kuwait. Eileen O'Connor is standing by now in Moscow for more reaction to the situation. Eileen?
Well, early this morning, a message was sent via Iraqi Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz, who went to the Soviet embassy in Iraq. The message was from Saddam Hussein to the Soviets, saying the Iraqis had already begun withdrawing and that there are no preconditions. The Soviets are now calling for a ceasefire and will take this call to the UN Security Council. Given the previous Allied decision to begin the ground war, despite Soviet pleas to wait, it may be that the Soviets are using the Security Council as a mechanism of international pressure to try to force a ceasefire. The Soviets are also using a moral argument, saying with an unconditional immediate Iraqi withdrawal, there can be, quote, no pretext for prolonging the conflict and not affecting a ceasefire. The Soviets say their actions are morally justified and that peace should have been given a chance before the ground war started. The Soviets say only after can we see the cost in Kuwaiti, Iraqi, and American lives. They will not blame the United States directly, but said the Gulf ground war was regrettable. Clearly, the Soviets are back in the mix in a big way, a role they need since they want a voice in post-war security arrangements in the region. Their message today included a call for a peaceful, prosperous post-war Iraq, but they avoid saying if that means military as well as economic aid from the Soviets after the war. The Soviets say a prosperous Iraq is necessary, that Iraq should not be destroyed or isolated, that they warn will lead to desires for revenge on the part of Iraq. This, together with a call for a ceasefire, will clearly please many Arabs, and it will put the Soviets back into the mix with a say in security in the region. Eileen O'Connor, CNN, reporting live from Moscow.
Eileen, do you get a sense that the ordinary citizen in Moscow is following this story very closely? And if so, what is the reaction on the street?
Well, we talked to a lot of Soviets yesterday about that, asking them, despite their problems at home, what they did feel about the Gulf War. And many of them actually, as of yesterday, supported the United States and said that they believe that Saddam Hussein had not, in fact, the Soviet peace plan had not gone far enough, and that they agreed with the United States that perhaps a ground war was necessary. But many of them said that peace should now be given a chance, and also we have not talked to people since this latest proposal, but as of yesterday, many people were saying that the longer the war, the harder it would be for people here to support not giving any more diplomatic proposals a chance.
Okay. Eileen O'Connor, thank you for that report, reporting live from Moscow. Molly?
Keeping tabs on White House reaction to these latest maneuverings is CNN's Mary Tillotson. She's standing by live at the White House this morning. Mary?
Good morning. U.S. officials will be watching what Iraqis in Kuwait do at least as much, if not more, than they are analyzing the words of Saddam Hussein as they try to figure out if the war might really be ending. The word from American officials so far, no definitive sign of a complete Iraqi pullout. After word reached Washington last night of Iraq's announced intention to withdraw, President Bush met with his military advisors more than an hour, then sent his spokesman Marlin Fitzwater out to tell reporters about U.S. skepticism that Iraq can be trusted.
We remember when Saddam Hussein's tanks pretended to surrender at Kafshi, only to turn and fire. We remember the scud attacks today and Saddam's many broken promises of the past. There are at least an additional 22 dead Americans tonight who offer silent testimony to the intentions of Saddam Hussein. The statement out of Baghdad today says that Saddam Hussein's forces will fight their way out while retreating. We will not attack unarmed soldiers in retreat, but we will consider retreating combat units as a movement of war.
Regrettably, since Fitzwater made that statement last night, the U.S. casualty count in that Scud attack in Saudi Arabia has risen to 27 known dead. Fitzwater said Iraqis who lay down their arms as they retreat will not be attacked by Allied forces, a clear implication that if the intention of Saddam Hussein is to get military materiel out of Kuwait, the Allies will try and stop that. And even if there is a full-scale Iraqi withdrawal now underway, there are still several points that are not expected to satisfy the United States. In President Bush's ultimatum to Saddam Hussein last Friday, he said that among the conditions which Saddam should meet as he withdraws were to reveal the location of all booby traps and explosives within Kuwait, to release civilians and prisoners of war, to send home the remains of any war dead, and additionally to comply with all 12 UN resolutions, most particularly that resolution that would say Kuwait has not been annexed by Iraq, and the resolution that says Iraq should pay war reparations to Kuwait. The last word from presidential spokesman Fitzwater is that while the Allies try to sort all of this out, the war continues. Molly?
Mary, do you expect another statement from the White House today? Obviously, there have been some overnight developments that the White House might want to comment on. What do you expect?
I think we'll hear some word, whether it's official and attributable to Fitzwater or from the president himself. The only question, I think, is when and how much more information they do want to get out of the war zone itself. I do believe that we will probably have a bit of a wait while the Allies try and find out what is actually happening on the ground. They know now what Saddam Hussein has said, and we'll be waiting to see how that is put into action, if at all.
All right, CNN's Mary Tillotson reporting for us live from the White House this morning. We thank her. Don't go away. We'll be right back with a report from Saudi Arabia.
Anything about those plans?
Well, they are planning to move closer to Kuwait boundaries. And of course, as I told you earlier, that we're now extremely pleased that the things are getting very close to completely liberating Kuwait.
What are some of these kinds of logistical problems that you are going to have in moving back into Kuwait and getting a functioning society going again?
Well, we have a full task force of so many people, Kuwaiti people. I've been studying this and planning for this minute and for this day. This is called the Emergency and Recovery Task Force, which will take care of the first, at most 90 days, the emergency period, in which they make sure they have the essential services connected, food, medicine, and so on. And after that, the recovery program will start.
Can you give us some further details about what do you actually do on the day you get back to Kuwait City? What are your immediate priorities?
Well, you know, no matter whatever we set up here and we plan here, might change when we get there and see what conditions look like there. But we are very anxious to see, first of all, our families in Kuwait, and to see them safe and alive.
Give me some idea of your emotions and the emotions of your colleagues. You've weathered these past 6 months in exile now. Liberation is imminent. What are you feeling inside?
Well, we're feeling great now. We are extremely pleased, especially when we saw some of the Iraqi people, as Peter Arnett was saying outside of the Rashid Hotel, celebrating the withdrawal from Kuwait by drinking alcohol. We just finished a prayer thanking God for that Kuwait now is almost liberated, and we performed this prayer and extended it for the safety of our people and the troops liberating Kuwait.
We've had many reports of atrocities in Kuwait. How do you think on an emotional level ordinary Kuwaitis, both in Kuwait City now and those going back, are going to deal with this destruction and this terror that's been spread among Kuwaiti society and Kuwaiti people?
I think we look at things positively. At least now, atrocities has stopped. This is a very important thing. At least our people now are in safe hands. These are the most important things to us now, to make sure that they are safe, they have food, they have water, and so on.
A quick final question. We have a few seconds left. What about retribution for those who collaborated with the Iraqis?
Well, we cannot comment on that until Kuwait is completely liberated.
Okay. Dr. Hasan al-Sanad is the Deputy Director of the Kuwait Information Ministry. We've been speaking with him here in eastern Saudi Arabia, where the exiled Kuwaiti community is preparing to return to a liberated, but many fear a devastated Kuwait. Mike Chenoy, CNN, reporting live from eastern Saudi Arabia.
As our extensive coverage of the Gulf War continues, Business Morning, usually seen at this time, will not be, and instead we'll bring you a complete business news update within this hour.
Topping our news, Iraq's Saddam Hussein tells his people they have faced the whole world and won. In an address on Baghdad radio, Mr. Hussein says Iraqi troops are withdrawing from Kuwait and will be out by today. And he now says Kuwait is no longer part of Iraq.
At this point in time, it will be clear then that what we harvest will be the result of what we sowed. In this mother of battles, we have succeeded in harvesting what we have sowed. The great harvest will be, and its yield in its later time will be much more than at the present time. That we have sown in this mother of battle, in terms of victory and heroism and glory, and the sacrifices of the great faithful people of Iraq, without hesitation or fear. God will support the Iraqi Mujahideen for their great jihad on the Arab world level and on an international level, and God will give them the honor of belonging to an honorable and dignified position, and until God wills, for the halting of the conflict.
Reuters news service quotes Kuwaiti military officers as saying Iraqi troops have evacuated Kuwait City. U.S. military sources say there has been no sign of a pullout, however, but a British commander says there is some evidence of a withdrawal. The White House says Iraq must still comply with all 12 United Nations Security Council resolutions and agree to a U.S. ultimatum issued last Friday. Soviet officials say Iraq's announced withdrawal satisfies all interested parties in the war. The UN Security Council held a closed-door meeting this morning. The council adjourned without reaching a decision on a ceasefire.
U.S. military officials still do not know exactly what part of an Iraqi Scud missile caused the destruction of a temporary barracks for U.S. servicemen in Saudi Arabia. The Scud came down near Dhahran Monday evening. This tape was shot on a home video camera.
It's coming down.
27 U.S. soldiers are confirmed dead, another 98 wounded when the building burst into flame. U.S. pilots say the overcast conditions were perfect for the attack since the weather blinds the Scud-fighting warplanes used to combat the missiles. This was the worst Scud attack since the start of the war. It is not known whether Patriot defensive missiles were fired by U.S. soldiers. Officials are not sure if the warhead detonated near the building or if the damage was caused by other falling debris from the disintegrating missile. Allied forces, meanwhile, continue to push deeper into Iraq and Kuwait. The Iranian news agency says Allied aircraft blasted several sites in southern Iraq, describing the attacks as the fiercest since the war began. Coalition forces and Republican Guard units are heading for what could be a key showdown in the desert. Officials say more than 100,000 Allied troops are headed towards Saddam Hussein's best fighters. A U.S. military briefer says there have already been some encounters with Republican Guard troops, with Allied forces winning. A senior Pentagon official expects the major clashes soon, perhaps today. Back in Kuwait, U.S. soldiers outside the capital city await the arrival of Arab forces. It is expected the troops will link up today and soon begin the recapture of Kuwait City. Allied officials report Iraqi soldiers are withdrawing, leaving behind weapons and helmets in their haste to evacuate. The prisoner of war count continues to escalate. One Saudi official puts the total at more than 25,000 Iraqi soldiers in custody. There have been no figures on Iraqi deaths so far. U.S. soldiers are often required to bury the dead they encounter as they continue their march through the battle zone. These pictures are believed to show Iraqis killed during the fighting.
We'll bring you now an abbreviated version of some business news. Stuart Varney is here to do that at our business.
Will complete the withdrawal and pull out from Kuwait. On this day, when our struggle against aggression and the ranks of atheism and infidelity A hateful coalition made of 30 countries which have officially declared and waged war against under the leadership of the USA. Our fighting of them would today have extended to a period of time for the first month of this year, starting from the 16th and the 17th of January up to the present moment.
The Soviet Union is calling for a ceasefire in the Gulf. The Soviet Union's deputy foreign minister says his country is convinced that Saddam Hussein is sincere in his declaration of withdrawal.
We proceed from the premise that this new step on the part of the Iraqi leadership would satisfy all the interested parties. I would also like to inform you that immediately after it became known in Moscow, after this message became known in Moscow, we officially informed the United States about the fact that Iraq began to comply and implement the corresponding resolution of the Security Council, number 660.
Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev's spokesman, Vitaly Ignatenko, is making some comments right now in Moscow, and we're going to join those comments live.
A long working day, and probably even today, our president will be in the vicinity of the location where Chernobyl disaster took place. Now, since you have already met Mr. Belanogov and Mr. Churkin, consequently, a certain part of questions that relate to the Persian Gulf situation and the Security Council of the United Nations, those distinguished representatives have already highlighted some of the aspects, but there are some messages that came. A few hours ago, Saddam Hussein announced that the withdrawal of troops would be completed today. All this seriously changes the entire situation in this area, and it also changes both the military situation, and there are some reports coming from the Security Council session. 2 sessions have been held. As you know, they are held in camera, and these meetings of the Security Council discuss the compliance of Iraq with all the resolutions of the Security Council, that is all the 12 and not only 660. Yemen and Cuba stand for immediate ceasefire, whereas the United States, Belgium, advocate or request to postpone the meeting of the Security Council for consultations, and they insist on firm guarantees that Iraq would comply with all the resolutions of the Security Council. Now, I am prepared to answer your questions. Yes, please. Norwegian television. I have 2 questions. First, do you consider that it is realistically possible to complete the withdrawal of Iraqi troops within today? As I understand, the Soviet Union supports the demand that Iraq comply with all the resolutions of the Security Council. Yes, of course, the Soviet Union, since it took part in the adoption of those resolutions, uphold the concept that Iraq should take for fulfillment all the resolutions of the Security Council. As regards the first part of your questions, it is up to Iraq whether it would be able to withdraw the troops by the end of today, but in any case, it should do its best to avoid further destruction and casualties.
ABC News. I have two questions. Does the Soviet government believe that Iraqi troops should be allowed to withdraw from Kuwait with or without their weapons? And number two, does the Soviet Union believe that a peaceful, secure Middle East can be guaranteed with Saddam Hussein remaining in power? Thank you.
Your second question is really splendid. I thank you for it. We do stand for peaceful and prosperous Middle East, including such an important nation as Iraq, with its territorial integrity and not fragmented country. But who will head this country and what its administrative structure be should be decided by the Iraqi peoples themselves, and the Soviet Union will not in any way influence the development of events in that country. As regards the withdrawal of the troops and the condition in which they would be withdrawn, it is again up to Iraq, and I must say that apparently it would be faster to withdraw the troops on movable means, on motorized means, rather than on foot or running. That is my assumption. Although I am not a good officer of a general headquarters. Yes, please.
Question from Canadian radio. You had told us before the ground war began that Iraq had missed its last chance for peace. The following day, once the war had begun, we heard from Mr. Churkin, who appeared to blame the Bush administration and accused Washington of following its military instincts. Could you clarify for us, please, President Gorbachev's position on the ground war and on who missed the chance for peace?
The chance for peace was missed by Saddam Hussein. Yes, please.
I have two questions. One, does the Soviet Union have any indication that Iraq has begun its withdrawal from Kuwait? And two, do you have some specifics on Gorbachev's itinerary tomorrow in Belarus?
As you know, all the reports regarding military actions in Kuwait and Iraq are kept under very strict censorship of the multinational forces and the U.S. military command. But nonetheless, there are certain possibilities to see what is happening there. I do not mean a keyhole, but sometimes Soviet satulites move over that area and we manage to see something. During the 1 or 1.5 hours that have elapsed after all those announcements made by Hussein, we cannot say that there is an overall movement towards the state border and immediate evacuation of Saddam's troops. But during the past 24 hours, it could be seen that many soldiers were surrendering. 1,157 missions of U.S. aircraft were reported. 4 losses were also reported among combat vehicles of the multinational forces, and if I am not mistaken, 50 tanks, T-72 tanks on the part of Iraq. But since those photographs come from a very high altitude, some mistakes are possible. Yes, please. Please speak through the microphone. In addition to Minsk, it is planned for Gomel and Mogilev. The American troops at present have moved into Iraq. Does the Soviet Union demand their immediate withdrawal? Do you consider that the trip of Soviet President to Minsk?
Нет, она не связана с Ираком. Нет, не связана.
It is not related to Iraq, because these areas are too far apart from each other. The first question, please. As regards...
Меня второй сбил.
You see, your second question confused me. Does the Soviet Union demand withdrawal of U.S. troops? No.
Да, пожалуйста.
Yes, please.
Пожалуйста. Товарищ Алимов.
Камрид Алимов.
Известие.
Известие.
Ну, кто тебя не знает?
Чем все-таки вызван столь неожиданный отъезд?
What is the cause for such an immediate, rapid departure of Mikhail Gorbachev for Belarus? What topics will he discuss during his meetings with the working people of Belarus's capital?
Ну, что касается поездок президента,
as regards trips of the president, such definitions as sudden, unexpected are not acceptable, because such trips are always planned, and it is not a single trip. There are several trips planned. For example, there was a trip to Kazakhstan that was planned, that it will definitely take place at a certain moment of time, but this is a scheduled trip, which was planned by the president for a long time, but lack of time, enormous problems held the president in Kremlin. You are quite aware of his tight schedule, which does not, unfortunately, permit him often to leave Moscow. But the main topic, of course, is very clear. This area is a very complex area. Many locations in that republic find themselves in a disastrous state, even several years after the Chernobyl disaster. But on the other part, there is a positive experience in restoration of human settlements, townships. People have become adapted to this. The state and the president devote great attention. So now it is very important for the president to take counsel with the people. On location is really essential for the president. He has felt this necessity for a long time, and now it is being materialized. I believe that during his meeting with the workers of the tractor building factory, he will broach a broad range of issues, including the state of our economy, referendum, environmental issues, and the Union Treaty. So I believe that will be a broad range of issues that would be discussed, but you'll be able to see that on television tonight.
Question from Channel 4 News London. Is the Soviet Union insisting that Iraq should pay compensation for the damage it's caused in Kuwait?
The Soviet Union insists on the implementation of all the resolutions of the Security Council. Those resolutions contain a provision on compensation.
Вопрос от BBC.
BBC. What is the precise position of the Soviet Union at the Security Council meeting? Is the Soviet Union also in favor of an immediate ceasefire? Yes, of course, we are in favor.
Question from CNN. Do you know if the Soviet Union has any plans in the coming future to offer its good offices as a mediator in some sort of formal peace treaty between the warring parties?
Why do you speak of a mediator? The Soviet Union considers itself to be bound by the obligations that it undertook in the Security Council. of the United Nations. Our role is not to be a mediator, it's only to be active. You know about our principled position very well. But of course, every country has its own specifics, its own specific positions. I do think that such additional possibilities, such specificity of our relations with Iraq does allow us to have a certain individuality of our position. If we apply all that for the good of the world, I do think that that would respond to the interests of the whole of the world community.
Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, do you, this morning, Mr. Belanogov suggested that some observers now believe or are beginning to believe that the Allies and the United States are pursuing goals other than those in the UN resolutions. Do you believe that? Does the President's office of the Soviet Union believe that?
Что я не понял, честно говоря. Может, еще раз вы повторите?
Frankly speaking, I did not get your
this
question
morning, Mr. Belanogov suggested that some observers believe now that the Allies and the United States are pursuing other goals, different goals from those stated in the UN resolutions concerning Kuwait. Do you believe that, or does the President's office believe that?
Мы свою позицию ведь вам высказывали.
We have stated our position already. We said that the world community can put an end to this conflict, dramatic conflict in the Persian Gulf peacefully, and already a few days ago. We had a whole number of proposals, and the consent expressed by Saddam Hussein to implement those famous 6 points. I think that the goal is shared by everybody, and it's one and the same goal. That is, the aggressor should be punished, that Kuwait should be a free country, a sovereign country. This is the goal. But there are various ways of achieving this task. We have proposed the peaceful way. There is a certain phase in this conflict which we call the military phase. We try to avoid this phase. This is the whole difference. Musawari, Egypt. Did the Soviet Union influence in any way Saddam Hussein, pressure him after the beginning of land operations in order to make him agree to this proposal? Will the Soviet Union, secondly, be insisting upon putting an end to the sanctions against Iraq, and will it cooperate with Iraq after the withdrawal? After the withdrawal, only one resolution of the Security Council will be thus implemented. There would still be 11 resolutions pending. The Soviet Union will join all the other states who will be insisting on the strict implementation of all the resolutions of the Security Council. Did the Soviet Union exert any pressure on Saddam Hussein? No, I think we did not exert any pressure. We were holding very thorough and careful negotiations. Our last contact was with Tariq Aziz when he was already boarding the plane. And we expressed the hope that wisdom be shown in Baghdad, and that this wisdom would prevail as soon as possible, would prevail in the outlook of their leader. Unfortunately, he did not hear our voice then.
Question from NBC News. Would the Soviet Union be prepared to participate in, to the point of sending troops to a United Nations peacekeeping or observer group that would oversee the peaceful withdrawal of Iraqi troops from Kuwait?
In principle, our country is against sending troops to this region in any capacity. but observers, if they will be the observers of the United Nations, well, I do think that such observers should be sought in those countries that were not directly involved in this conflict in the Gulf. I would rather address the representatives of CBS. Excuse me for going through my papers. We received information that the Vice President of CBS, Mr. Dochizari, asked us to transmit to Gorbachev his thanks for the attention he paid to the plight of their journalist crew. As Mr. Dochizari said, as a result of the contacts with Iraqi officials, he came to the conclusion that the group of Mr. Simon is presently in Baghdad, though there was no official confirmation of that. The Vice President of CBS insisted on the possibility to meet his crew, and he once again asked the Soviet authorities and the President to intervene and to assist in that. I should say that yesterday we went into this issue, and we tried to contact Baghdad along a number of channels, and our embassy is involved directly in a search for those journalists. NHK Japan. Prior to leaving for Minsk, did Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev speak to Mr. Bush? And if so, then what did they speak about? If they did have a conversation, I would begin with that. The American side was informed something around 4 in the morning, Moscow time, about the address, the message by Saddam Hussein. The first American to know about that was James Baker.
Christian Science Monitor. I'm a little confused. You earlier said that it was the Iraqis who missed the opportunity for peace, and then later on you said that this could have been settled peacefully several days ago on the basis of the Iraqi agreement to the 6 points. Could you, those two statements do not seem to be the same. Are you saying clearly that you believe the decision to launch the ground war was not necessary?
Yes, I do think that the Allies could have waited a bit longer to start their land offensive. We already said that if we would have been able to integrate.
You've been watching Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev's official spokesman, Vitaly Ignatenko, speaking to reporters in Moscow, addressing the issue of Saddam Hussein's declaration of withdrawal from Kuwait. One of the important points that he made was that after the withdrawal and Iraq's compliance with UN Resolution 660 for unconditional withdrawal, the Soviets would join the Security Council members, says Ignatenko, in saying that Iraq must then comply with the other 11 declarations passed by the Council that orders Iraq out of Kuwait. And we'll have more on all of this. Don?
CNN's Mary Tillotson is standing by live now at the White House. And Mary, how do you think these remarks by the Soviet spokesman will play in Washington?
I think that Iraq has already surrendered once to the Soviet Union, and that did not satisfy the U.S.-led coalition. If there is a ceasefire accepted by the coalition, the word will not come from Moscow. It would most likely come first here at the White House, and so far there is no change in America's position. President Bush was up at 5:30 this morning getting an update on the situation in the Middle East from the Situation Room at the White House. U.S. officials say as of this morning they have no definitive information that an Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait is underway, and that absent that the war continues. White House spokesman Bill Harlow said this morning that even if Iraq were to withdraw from Kuwait, Saddam Hussein has not said that his men would lay down his arms, nor has Saddam Hussein said that Iraq will now comply with all those UN resolutions. And at the current moment, the Allied position continues to wage war. Mary Tillotson, CNN Live at the White House.
Okay, thank you, Marion. We'll be back with more coverage on the war right after this.
From the front lines and behind the scenes, the most complete coverage of the war in the Gulf is on CNN.
As we continue to get reports that Iraqi forces are now pulling out of Kuwait, we go on the phone line now to CNN's Rick Salinger. He's standing by live in Saudi Arabia. Rick, what can you tell us about the official military reaction of the Allies to that news?
Well, I think we can sum it up in 3 words. What's happening in Kuwait right now, they say, is retreat, not withdrawal. A senior military source has told CNN there are some signs of an Iraqi retreat, and he says it is as a result of pressure from coalition attacks. It's obvious that the retreat is to prevent annihilation and is not a voluntary withdrawal. Now, Central Command here is not reporting any signs or sees any signs of a large-scale voluntary withdrawal at this time. And they say the bombing and ground fighting will go on. They will continue to prosecute the campaign until getting word from Washington that it's all over. Iraqi troops heading north with their weapons are subject to an attack. So just because Baghdad says it's over, the withdrawing, doesn't mean that it is. Molly?
Are you getting any descriptions of what the Allies are calling this retreat?
Well, retreat is what it is. They are heading north to Iraq as quickly as they can in many cases. Apparently, the Allied forces are closing in on them from all sides. They have heard or received word of the broadcast from Saddam Hussein to withdraw, and they are trying to get out of the path of the Allied forces as quickly as they can before they're captured.
CNN's Rick Salinger reporting for us live from Saudi Arabia. Thanks, Rick. Don?
And now, with the latest from the Pentagon, here's CNN's Gene Randall live. Gene?
Good morning, Don. Well, officials here say the Iraqi army is indeed an army in retreat. They say it is not an orderly withdrawal and still to be determined exactly what the Iraqis intend to do with their weapons. It is, of course, a morning of quick-moving developments, and earlier here, a senior military official told us it would be very imprudent for Allied battlefield commanders to let down their guard on the basis of a radio broadcast, a reference to Saddam Hussein's broadcast. He said if a single American life is lost in a ruse, it would be a tragedy. We must continue to prosecute the campaign until we are absolutely sure that any withdrawal is true in both letter and spirit. The withdrawal announcement from Baghdad, we are told, has had no effect on either ground or air operations by the coalition so far, and a senior official tells us only a presidential decision could change that. And once again, we were reminded of Marlin Fitzwater's words late Monday night at the White House, that any soldier in a tank or an armored personnel carrier or other piece of military equipment will be considered an armed soldier, and retreating combat units will be treated as a movement of war. And it is also clear here that coalition forces will be in a very good position to judge exactly what the Iraqis are up to. If they try to leave Kuwait or southern Iraq with their heavy equipment, artillery pieces, armor, they can be stopped. And the impression we get is that they will be stopped. Gene Randall, CNN Live at the Pentagon.
Okay, Gene, thank you.
And CNN's Gulf War coverage will continue. Stay with us.
City. The official Kuwait news agency and Reuters news service quotes senior Kuwaiti military officials who say the city has been evacuated. The reports follow an announcement from Iraqi President Saddam Hussein on Baghdad radio today that Iraqi troops would complete a withdrawal from Kuwait by tonight.
On the 8th of August 1989, that Iraq legally and constitutionally have taken over Kuwait, and that it continued to be part of Iraq, that is Kuwait. Until last night, Kuwait was part and parcel of Iraq when the Iraqi withdrawal started.
Iraqis rushed into the streets of Baghdad following that announcement. Many fired guns in celebration. There is a report of an outpouring of joy in Kuwait City as well, though Kuwait Radio is urging residents to stay inside until the city has been declared safe. Saddam Hussein's announcement on Baghdad Radio came less than an hour after the UN Security Council recessed a closed-door session. That meeting is expected to continue later today. The Soviet Union presented a new peace plan to the Security Council. That plan is reported to be close to the conditions set forth by President Bush before the ground offensive began. Shortly after Mr. Hussein's radio address, the Soviet Deputy Foreign Minister held a briefing in which he said Iraqi troops had already begun withdrawing from Kuwait.
The Iraqi troops are leaving Kuwait and are moving in the direction of their own Iraqi territory. And I do not question in any way the correctness of what was said in the statement by Saddam Hussein transmitted this night, in the message by the Iraqi president to our embassy, and in what was stated by the Baghdad radio today about an order being issued to the troops to leave Kuwait. I cannot question the words pronounced by Saddam Hussein just half an hour ago, maybe slightly more than half an hour ago, where he said that the withdrawal of troops from Kuwait will continue and it would be completed.
The Allies, meanwhile, are pressing on with the war effort. British officials say Mr. Hussein's declaration of a withdrawal of forces from Kuwait was not sufficient and that he must declare full implementation of all UN resolutions. Here is what we know of troop movements. U.S. and British armored forces in southern Iraq are racing towards the Euphrates River in an attempt to block the retreat of Iraqi Republican Guard tanks. Reports say U.S., Saudi, Egyptian, Kuwait, and other coalition forces are close to Kuwait City and intend to encircle it. The number of Iraqi prisoners continue to climb, with Saudi officials saying there are more than 25,000 now. One Iraqi prisoner wearing Bermuda shorts and a T-shirt said he traveled from the United States to visit his grandmother in Iraq and was drafted into the army. U.S. military officials say 28 U.S. servicemen were killed and another 100 wounded in Monday night's Scud attack in Saudi Arabia. An Iraqi missile or debris from that missile struck a warehouse serving as a barracks. Allied pilots say Iraq deliberately chose an overcast night to launch the attack because bad weather hinders the Patriot defense missile system.
At 36 minutes past the hour now, we'll take a break for some business news. CNN's Stuart Varney is in New York for that. Hello, Stuart.
Good morning, Molly. A sell-off today. The capital. This is an all-clear that followed an alert about 20 minutes ago. It's very rainy here today. There was a series of thunderclaps earlier. Not to be confused with the air raids, but this is just an all-clear sounding, and I hope will be over in a minute. The withdrawal announcement by Saddam Hussein comes 41 days after the air war began. Every day and night, targets around the city have been bombed by Allied planes. It's been clear for 2 weeks now that the Iraqi people we met were anxious to get this war over, even if it meant pulling out of Kuwait. Iraqi officials have told us that the Kuwait City Basra road, that's the road to Iraq's second biggest city in the south, the road to Basra from Kuwait City was closed last night to civilian traffic, officials told us, to allow the withdrawal to begin. We have heard reports that Kuwait City has been, there's been withdrawal total of Iraqi troops. We haven't had any confirmation from that here, Molly.
All right, thanks for that. That's CNN's Peter Hornecker with an update from Baghdad. Thanks, Peter. Don?
And once again, an update on today's fast-paced developments in the Gulf War. A senior military official says there are signs of an Iraqi retreat as a result of pressure from coalition attacks. That comment comes after Saddam Hussein went on Baghdad radio today to say he had ordered his troops to withdraw from Kuwait. The Iraqi president said the pullout would be over by the end of the day.
These glorious days will continue in the present and the future to tell the story of a truly sincere and faithful people, believing in the will of God and what He wants, believing in the values of the Arab nation, in its leadership role for this nation, and for the values of the Islamic Ummah in its true principles and what these principles should be like.
After that announcement, the Soviet Union said it had asked the UN Security Council to declare a ceasefire. But a senior British official says President Hussein's declaration was not sufficient to stop the Allied advance. Inside Kuwait, fires that may have been set by Iraqi troops continued to burn. There's also been an unconfirmed report from a senior Kuwaiti military official that Iraqi troops may have evacuated Kuwait City. The Reuters news agency says officials heard that report from Kuwaiti resistance fighters. A U.S. military source says Allied units have encountered some of Iraq's Republican Guard units. The official says wherever the Guards have been engaged, they have been beaten by Allied forces. But he says the bulk of the Guards have not yet been encountered. A Saudi official says fighting to retake Kuwait City from the Iraqis has now started. He said the city would be liberated soon.
With a view now on these fast-moving developments from Israel, we join CNN's Richard Roth. He's live in Tel Aviv. Richard?
Yes, every day a surprise from Saddam Hussein. With me now is an expert on Saddam Hussein and Iraq, Mr. Amatzia Baram, to explain perhaps what Saddam is thinking and what he might do next. You've written a book about Saddam. You're going to have a heck of a new epilogue to write. Why has he changed his mind right now on the troops?
I think that last night Saddam Hussein reached the conclusion that his army in Kuwait is doomed, and thus ordering it to leave Kuwait and legitimizing full flight would not make such a huge difference. However, by giving this order, he hoped to reap some benefits.
Okay, what is he hoping for now, and what benefits can he reap?
Okay, one benefit already emerges. He is very hopeful that the Soviets will be able to stop the war for him, either through the United Nations, or, if I can read his mind correctly, he hopes that the generals of the Red Army will convince Gorbachev to declare a state of alert, and thus indicate to the Americans, stop or something horrible is going to happen. That's how he thinks. I hope he's wrong. There is another benefit which he hopes to reap. He knows that his soldiers will no longer defend Kuwait, because you don't defend a bargaining chip. Now he's telling them, we are defending Iraq, so you can retreat. But in Iraq, I want to see a heroic stand, because this is our homeland. The homeland is in danger. And that's the second benefit he hopes to reap.
Once again in Baghdad, people were shooting weapons in celebration. Can Saddam really claim victory? Will the people still follow him after this?
If his army is more or less intact, more or less, he may ride the storm. But it seems to me that the Americans are not going, or the Allied forces are not going to have to give him this benefit. And it seems to me that his army will be bottled up, hopefully bottled up, in the Basra and Kuwait area. And then I'm afraid for him the time will be ticking. He will be living on borrowed time, because when everybody sees 500,000 soldiers leaving the bottled up area on foot or on trucks, leaving all their equipment behind, not even a gun, not even a pistol, I think this will be a horrendous blow to Saddam Hussein's prestige. He's not going to be toppled immediately, perhaps, but this will be the beginning of his end.
Is he capable of a statement, which the U.S. and the Allies apparently want, a statement which says we surrender and we unconditionally withdraw and we thus accept the UN resolutions? Is he capable of going on radio or issuing that statement?
Including recognizing the Kuwaiti emir and recognizing Kuwait's, and I would say Israel's, right for war reparations. To do that, he'll need to go through a personality change. It may happen under such stress, but it's not very likely.
The U.S. Unstated goal, a White House official said last night, de facto goal is the removal of Saddam. He still has a way of escaping many problems that he causes. What do you see happening? You mentioned that he could be toppled, but not right now. Is there anyone who could take over there?
Well, you have a lot of contenders, but there is no number 2 in Iraq. Saddam Hussein is number 1, and you have about 10 or 15 numbers 200. There is 199 vacuum between him and the earth. So when if somebody sticks a bullet in his head, then of course somebody will come on top, but not before an infighting, and possibly some kind of a combination between family, internal security apparatus, and army.
Mr. Amatzia Baram, thank you very much for joining us, an expert on Iraq. Lately, everyone has been predicting what Saddam will do next. We'll see in the next few hours. This is Richard Rolfe, CNN, reporting live from Tel Aviv.
Thanks, Richard. Still to come, we'll take you live to London. We'll be talking to an expert on Iraqi ground forces, the forces that are attempting now to leave Kuwait. Stay with us.
It's just a...
We've heard extensive briefings from Moscow today, including a plea from a Soviet spokesman for an immediate ceasefire in the war in the Persian Gulf. Steve Hurst is standing by live now in Moscow. And Steve, are the Soviets asking the Allies to withdraw from Iraqi territory, or are they taking a harder line against the Allies?
The Soviets now seem to be talking to an Arab audience, but at the same time, Mr. Vitaly Ignatenko, the presidential spokesman who just finished a briefing here, said the Soviets had no intentions of exerting pressure on Washington to do anything other than what it was doing. He did say that the Soviets had no plans to exert pressure on the United States to pull back from positions already occupied in Iraq, and that it was only going to continue asking in the UN Security Council that there be a ceasefire. Mr. Ignatenko did not seem to harden his position, although he said, we can only reiterate our regret that the Allies did not wait to attack. He said, we don't think that we're going to exert pressure on the United States. Our relationship has gone beyond pressure tactic, he said. He did also not rule out sending Soviet observers to a UN observer force in Iraq and Kuwait if asked to do so, but he said he did not think that would be appropriate. He said the Soviets also have no future role to play in what will happen to Saddam Hussein, whether he will continue as leader of Iraq or not. He interestingly said that the Soviets had had no contact until that message from their embassy in Baghdad earlier today with either Saddam Hussein or Tariq Aziz, the Iraqi foreign minister, since he left Moscow on Saturday when the Soviets asked him to go back to Saddam Hussein and ask for wisdom. He said, and I quote him, unfortunately, he did not hear our voice at that time. The Soviets also said they were sorry that it took a ground offensive to bring the Iraqis to the position of withdrawing, but that he also seemed to understand that. He said again that the U.S. and their allies should have waited, and when asked if the Soviets had any plans to begin rearming the Iraqis once this conflict was over, he said, we will have to analyze our relations with many countries in that region. Iraq is certainly one of those. But as earlier in the day, when Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Belanogov was asked that question, Mr. Ignatenko as well ignored a direct answer to the question. Steve Hurst, CNN, reporting live from the Soviet Press Center in Moscow.
Thank you, Steve.